Hi, everybody. Welcome to Nom Watch Review, part of Nom Talk Network. Today on Nom Watch Review is more of like a holiday highlight special. We are going to observe Indigenous Peoples Day and give you our top picks for Indigenous created, fronted films and TV shows while we eat and drink our favorite snacks. But before we get into it, I am going to pass it over to our lovely, lovely guest, Jordyn, because he has something very interesting he would like to do for us today on Indigenous People Day. Jordyn, take it over.
Thank you so much, Eric. And greetings to Toni and everybody else, producer staff and everybody that's here. Before we get started, in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day, I would like to do a land acknowledgement to the Indigenous tribes that were here before us, that were here on established lands. And so I have asked our host, Eric, and our lovely guest, Toni, for their individual locations to acknowledge the tribes that we are going to be acknowledging. So here at Nom Talk Network, we are a learning community within the Indigenous homelands of people who have been known for us as, in my case, the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians of the Shishkaguanga village and Quiche Nation, as well as the Apache and the Lenni Lenape tribes. Tonight, we acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this land on which we gather. We are a constant learning community, so this acknowledgement is part of an ongoing process of working to raise awareness about histories that are too often erased or forgotten, to recognize our place in this history, and to affirm that our commitment to social justice, systematic change, and anti-racism are acknowledged. So I just wanted to say that.
Nice, nice. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much. But having said that, go ahead and introduce yourself, Jordyn. Welcome to Indigenous People Day with us.
Well, in that case, hi, everyone. My name is Jordyn Orozco. As you've seen me before, I've been a numerous host and guest on a couple of these wonderful individual shows, including Eric, who I've been a guest for, and Toni, who's been a guest for me on wonderful and amazing shows that we are probably going to talk about tonight, and movies. Tonight, I'm having a wonderful, it's like a cheesy chicken, broccoli, and rice like dish that I'm just going to be chomping on. And I have my wonderful Mai Tai, of course, and my cute little pink little Yeti. So
nice, nice. Well, welcome. Thank you, thank you. And then our next lovely guest for the evening, who I haven't seen in quite a minute either. We've done a couple of these together. Toni, how are you? How have you been? Introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, I've been good. I've just been, missing for a minute. But I've missed being part of these conversations, and I can't think of a better day to make my joyful return. Hi, everybody. I'm Toni Sanchez. I am Seminole from the Seminole tribe of Florida, originally from a little tiny town in the reservation of Immokalee, Florida. I'm super happy to be here. I don't have anything cool to like share in terms of like my food and drink. I literally just have like the most basic glass of water. I just had some amazing like barbecue chicken downstairs. That's about, I don't have it. I didn't prepare properly. And if I had, like, I'm thinking of like all the cool shirts. I literally have this amazing t-shirt that looks like a stack of VHSs, but it's literally just names of like really awesome and amazing Indigenous TV shows and movies. So like some of the stuff that we're going to be discussing here tonight are on there. And I'm like, why didn't I just pack that? Why didn't I just have that at the ready? I'm not good at this. So I do apologize for not being as prepared as I should be, but I'm so happy to be here for today and to talk about this, because I never get to talk about this subject as much as I would like to. So yeah, super excited to be here. So yeah, back to y'all.
Well, thank you for being here. Trust me, there's been several times that I'm like, I just have a drink. I've already eaten. But I am your host, Erric Ramirez. I am also doing the hydration thing with a giant bottle of water. And then I had to break my diet today, and I'm doing rolled tacos.
Yes.
These things are delicious, so I will be munching on those. I am a part of the Apache tribe from southern Colorado, northern New Mexico. That's where my family's reservation is and everything like that. So it's cool to have you guys here, and I'm excited to jump into this as well. Before we start, we have gotten somebody from the chat. It is Q. Welcome, Q, and thank you for being here. He says, I am part Choctaw Native American. My great-grandmother was full-blooded Choctaw, and I finished eating 4 little cheeseburger sliders, and I'm drinking a cheap version of 7-Up.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. I love it. I love it.
Sam's Club.
I was just gonna say.
I was gonna say,
Uh,
damn. Oh my gosh, so good.
oh yeah, no, lovely, lovely. And thank you for being here, Q. We always love having you here. But today, as I mentioned a little bit ago, we are going to be giving you our top picks for Indigenous Peoples Day. 3 categories that we all kind of chatted about, and a lot of us have the same picks tonight. So we will be going back and forth with each other. But first off, I am going to go with Indigenous Directed films. These are films that directors have brought out, either an Indigenous film or Indigenous directors, but they finally got out there. So we're going to go ahead and start with you, Toni. What is your Indigenous directed film that you have chosen for us?
I feel if we're going to kick off a discussion about Indigenous films, we have to take it back, not to the original, but definitely, I think it's the movie that we universally agree kind of kicked off the new age of Indigenous representation within film, and that's Smoke Signals.
Yeah.
Smoke Signals, for those who are unaware, is usually thought to be the first Native written, directed, with an all Native cast, and that really did receive mainstream success. It was like, a festival darling. If you have that DVD, I'm sure like they still would have on the back put, like, because back when we used to like really be hyped up about those little wreaths, like little like at the Cannes Film Festival or Sundance or whatever, like the whole back cover is nothing but that essentially. But yeah, it stars Adam Beach, Irene Bedard is in there. I mean, basically anybody and everybody who was acting at the moment, and who did, if you were Native and had an agent, you were in Smoke Signals. That's just basically how it went. And I love that the movie, I didn't see it until I was in high school, and I understand why it didn't like hit my radar, because it definitely deals with like some very like heavy themes, but it is a comedy, which I feel like is so effing Indigenous. Like, we are Indigenous peoples, like a lot of people who have just kind of had to like deal with a bunch of like generational trauma, that makes for great comedy, that makes for a lot of coping mechanisms that really, manifest themselves artistically. Mm-hmm. So a movie about a young guy having to take this road trip in order to deal with the death of his father, who had alcohol substance issues, that basically walked out on his family. That doesn't seem like that's perfect material for a comedy, but it actually ends up being hilarious, because the amount of times that, like, I mean, I've even seen one of my favorite journalists is Johnny J. And if you don't know her, you definitely should go check her out. She's the founder of A Tribe Called Geek. And I just saw a recent interview where she likes to, like, just to make sure that there's no pretendians in the crowd, she goes, "Hey, Victor." And if you didn't know to say, "Hey, Victor," I'm like, that's like the perfect way to test, like, if somebody is actually like from the community. So yeah, the movie's amazing. It's fantastic. It really just feels like it's a snapshot of like how complicated the experience can be when you're trying to like deal with, how mundane and silly, your modern life can be, but at the same time dealing with all the cultural influences within your life and trying to honor that best you can, and at the same time also deal with something that may not be so fun, like the death of a parent, and the history that they had with certain addictions. Yeah, I just love this movie. And just even if I didn't love it, I still think we would have to talk about it, just because we can't have a conversation about Indigenous film without acknowledging the movie that everybody agrees definitely kicked off this entire not trend, but I guess this new age of Indigenous representation.
Oh yeah, no, I completely, that was actually one of my picks for tonight for Indigenous Led, because the cast of it, like you said, if you were Indigenous and you had an agent, you were in this movie. But no, definitely I agree with you. The comedy in this movie is really what draws me to it. Like, me and my mom watch this movie probably once a year, just because it's so funny. And for instance, the other day when I was moving, me and my friend went out to go eat, and we were in the parking lot and went to go get in our car, and there was literally a car reversing through the parking lot and driving down the road, and we were like, look, it's the Smoke Signals car. 100%. So this is perfect. But yeah, I know that Jordyn as well was this one of your picks as well. a little bit. Did you want to talk about it a little bit and how it affected you?
I mean, so back when, so this came out in the 90s, right? Like back
Mhm.
when I was like coming of age and like I didn't know sort of like my identity, who I was, what's going on. And I don't remember much of like seeing this film first, but when, and not really technically knowing that all of these actors were Indigenous, right? Because I wasn't necessarily like back when I was sort of realizing who I was and like my sexuality and like my identity. So I realized that my sexuality was like my main identity before I had gotten to college, and then I started to realize like my ethnic identity and like how that played a role in sort of my upbringing. And it was this weird moment where I was just like, holy shit. And then it was like, what, when you get your like ancestry, DNA test and all that shit, you find out that my grandmother, who I'd visit in Arizona every year and in New Mexico, was like Indigenous, right? And then you're like, she was just my grandmother back then. Like there was no sort of like, my parents didn't really be like, oh, she was Native, right? And like it wasn't a thing, for me back then. But then realizing, after she, passed and everything, that this was important. Watching this film, it sort of, I was like, I need to watch it again. And what's funny is Toni had sent an email with her pics and said Smoke Signals, and I was like, I need to watch that film again because I don't, with my identity sort of figured out, I need to sort of like watch that in a new lens where I'm like, this is going to be something that means a little bit more to me now than it did when I watched it, right? When I was like young, high, and like just doing random ass shit, right? It was funny. It was hilarious. It honestly was just one of those films that, if you didn't see, you really missed out on it. But because I saw it, I was like, this was something just special. And with the people that I saw it with, it was just, I don't know. It was one of those staples for me in my life where it was sort of like, I felt seen without being realized, without like realizing it. Do you know what I mean? And it was just like, I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed it when I watched it.
Oh yeah, I don't think I've ever run across a single person who hasn't enjoyed Smoke Signals. But that is our first pick, our first off, Smoke Signals with our directed and Indigenous led. We are going for our next directed movie, which, Mr. Jordyn, I'm going to pass this along to you because we have the same pick for this one.
I was just going to say. So I picked Blood Quantum, right? Now, this movie, if you love horror, and because it's like October, like spooky season, right? When I originally watched this, I was like, this is absolutely insane, because I'm not one for like the gore movies, even though like gore doesn't necessarily bother me. So like I was a huge fan of like Walking Dead, like all these things, zombies, all that stuff. I love it. Shaun of the Dead, let's do it, blah, blah, blah. But when I first watched Blood Quantum, the allegory and the parallel to the Native community in this film, but also like the fact that it is an absolutely 100% awesome ass movie, like to begin with, was absolutely amazing. So if you all don't know, the original director of Blood Quantum is Jeff Barnaby, who basically, and I apologize if I get this wrong, but it is Mi'kmaq, which is a First Nations tribe of the northeastern woodlands indigenous to the areas of Canada's Atlantic provinces and the Gaspé Peninsula of Quebec, as well as northeastern region of Maine. So they all kind of like came down here in the U.S. as well. He was born. On res, and he basically became the director of this film, right? And basically cast, except for the white people that were in the film, he basically cast an entire Native. Oh, you're okay.
Sorry, my computer just freaked out. Stop it, computer.
No, it's okay. That was like a little scary. I love it.
It was just like the zombies are coming for you, Toni.
Yeah, Toni, you're the because you're Native, you're immune, but whoever's around you, they're gonna.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, and so if any of you haven't seen the movie, basically it starts out with like sort of like I don't want to say slow burn, but you basically start finding out that there's a dog, there's a human, they start going like rabid, and you don't know what's going on, and then you transition to 6 months later, I believe it is. Yes, and you find out that basically everybody in the entire world has turned into zombies except for this tribe that is specifically within Canada, and they are immune to it. Which, yes, we love to see it. And it is a whole story, which includes gore, which includes like just like campy things that are like going on in it, but also it's just a, one of the individuals, I believe, has a wife or girlfriend who's pregnant that is white, but obviously her baby is like mixed, right? And so she's wondering what's going to happen to this baby. And it's just an entire film. Just the entire time I was watching it, I was just like, this is absolutely amazing, because if white people watch this, like most of them are not going to get it. They're going to be like, oh, this was a zombie film. It's great. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, like, do you know what blood quantum is? Like, do you know what that thing is? And, a lot of people that have watched this that are, non-Indigenous that like watch it and they're like, it was good, but like this. And I'm like, then you didn't really get the picture, right? Like you didn't really get the whole story. And so I really loved this film, not only for the horror aspects, but because it was just so well done. I thought it was just so well done. The acting is, at times cheesy, but also necessary in a way where it was like, I don't think if this was done in a way where, like, let's say a white director and a white like writer did it, it would have been the same. So yeah, that's sort of my take on it.
Oh, I'm definitely right there with you. I loved that it was this Indigenous horror movie, and as you said, blood quantum, but also I loved that they still brought aspect of the res to it. Like you could start watching it and you're like, oh, like for me, I was just like, oh, I have an uncle like that, or I have an aunt like that, or yeah, my cousin's like that. I'm just like,
but also too the fact that the fact that they made the base like the res, right? Like
right?
that's where their base was. And I'm like, that's exactly how it would play out, right?
Oh yeah, no, it was quite lovely to see that. Much like Smoke Signals, it's just the actuality of showing these people who they are. Be it the messed up a little bit and everything like that, but the humor and just the actual tribe. I love this movie for that reason. Next, because we just went over Blood Quantum, which was my director pick, we are going into an Indigenous led film. So my pick for Indigenous led film, we've already talked about. So I'm actually going to go start with you today, Jordyn, with this one for your Indigenous led film that you want to talk about tonight. And I always get them when they're
no, everybody does. I like, even when I'm hosting, I'm like eating and then I'm like, oh, it's back to me. Sorry. Swallow. I think Toni, you and me sort of you were split in this one, but I think we agreed. My Indigenous led film is Prey. 100% bottom line. Prey is a Comanche film. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Comanche.
Thank you. And this film by far, so I've always loved the Predator series. I've always loved Aliens, right? Like I have a huge, you can go back in the history of like Nom Watch review and like how I've, got into Aliens and all that stuff. But Predator was pretty much the same way. My dad basically exposed me when I was a really small kid, and it was late at night, and we would sit on the couch and watch these scary movies. My mom would wake up and be super pissed off at my dad for showing me these incredibly gory, terrible, like scary films for me. But it almost became like, it wasn't scary to me. It almost became like a bonding experience for me, watching these films with my dad, watching these horror films. And I think that sort of desensitized me to a lot of like horror and like a lot of like scares. Because I do get scared from jump scares, but I don't necessarily like, things don't bother me as much as like other people. They're like, this is the scariest movie. And I'm like, this was the stupidest movie, right? But Prey, me and my dad watched together, and it was sort of like hey, let's watch this. Like we used to watch this, when I was a kid. And that film by far was probably the best Predator film I have ever seen. And it was a prequel to everything that happened, right? The fact that it was Native led, directed, they they consulted the tribe. They have a version in Comanche that you can watch with subtitles, right? Which I still have to watch, Toni. Don't hate me. I still have to watch it. I'm like, I need time to like watch it.
I'm going to meeting you right now.
But like I need to watch it because it just, I want to watch it in the true in the true language and everything, but also just the fact that like in interviews, the cast and everybody, they're just so humble. They're like, we are so happy that this was made. This was, you know, an amazing experience, but also just to get like this kind of culture out there and this kind of like this in a way that it was like merging pop culture, right? Like with indigenous and native culture in a way where it wasn't like, here, swallow this. It was like, this is how it was and this is how it would be, right? And I just loved Prey for that. I thought that every single actor in that entire film did an amazing job. So that's why I picked this one.
Good. Toni, you had the same choice as well. What were your thoughts on it and why'd you want to bring this up tonight?
So full disclosure, Prey is the only Predator movie I've ever watched. I've only seen Prey in the Comanche dub. So when I heard a lot of like people saying like, oh, the dialogue is weird or the pacing of it is odd and etc. And I'm like, I didn't get any of that because the Comanche dub to me is like perfect. And I think when I did, I think I was actually on this show talking about Prey and on Nom Talk. And I think one of the things that was brought up was just the fact, or that I brought up was like, I don't necessarily know, since I've never seen the English version, if audiences are just unused to seeing Native people in historic fiction speaking English, but any other ethnicity or nationality that is in historical fiction, if they speak English, even though, like, for example, I think I brought up Chernobyl. Like, obviously, Russian scientists in Russia would not be speaking English with English or Scottish accents, but we just let that gloss over.
Oh, no, I completely agree with you. I saw an article a couple of months ago, and they're like, why in like 1215 BC are they speaking like a perfect British dialect? Like,
right. But we kind of suspend our disbelief long enough because we understand that, like, okay, this is for English-speaking audiences, and that's why we're doing this. And well, one, I understand why. Well, first, I think it's a little weak that the studio felt like releasing the movie in the feature, like, would have been in Comanche, would have been like a step too far. Like, I get it. You're an American, film company. You want to make sure that your film does well. You don't want subtitles. American audiences are still really adverse to subtitles, which is silly.
Stupid.
It is stupid, but I'm like, all right, I get it, even though that's weak sauce. I think that it's just like, I think it's proving the point of like how little we get to see of these kind of stories, these kind of actors, and definitely within this time period. I think anybody who had an issue with it, I think their discomfort or their, being taken aback by it is just because of how little we get to see that. If it was white folks, if the French colonizers in that movie were speaking English, they would have never questioned it. They just would have been like, oh, of course, like, I understand like what's happening here because I've seen it plenty in other movies. But there's so much about that movie that I think does a lot of that, where it's like the first time that you've seen something done. It's like the first time that you've seen a total native reclamation of like a major sci-fi franchise, like an A-list, franchise. The first time that you've seen a predominantly all native cast in a big, huge franchise like this. The first time that you've seen that level of cooperation, consultation, and also being led by the Comanche consultants and artists that they contracted with. And consultation is such like a weird thing within like Indigenous circles, because it's like, is that just a way to like cover your ass, or they were like actually leading it? But because Jane Myers, the Comanche producer on it, I had an opportunity actually to meet with her completely separate. It was just part of my day job. I actually work for a Native-led nonprofit, and we were on this trip to New Mexico, and she just was like, hi, I'm Jane Myers. I have a movie coming out. It's called Prey. And I was like, I'm sorry, the Predator movie? Is that the movie you're talking about? And she's like, yeah, I actually have to be out of here in a minute because I've got a call with so-and-so at this studio. And I'm just like, yeah, man, you go do that. That's a way more to be doing. Get out of this room. Um, no, but she was totally lovely, but she talked about how her first thing that she was going to do was hire anybody and everybody that she could from her tribe, from the Comanche Nation. And I just was like, that's the dream. That's the dream when you finally like get to that level and you can actually get people to like, first on buy into your vision, but then when you go ahead and make the insistence that like, no, I have to hire the right people, and the right people are the people that this is about. You know, these are, you know, the descendants of the folks that you would be presumably talking about. Like, so to know that, you know, she was talking about within the end credits, some of the artwork that's done, you know, in order to depict like, you know, some of the Comanches with a predator, or like, you know, some of like that style. Those are all Comanche artists that were working on that. It was the Comanche language department that consulted with the dialogue and with the dub in order to make sure that, you know, the pronunciation was as close as possible, even historically so, because of course language evolves over time. So it just was like, I understood that what I was going to see was going to be important in terms of visibility and representation, but then just to see how good it is, like, exceeded any and every expectation that I had. And I had very little because, again, I've never seen any other Predator movies, so I have nothing else to gauge it against. But I am much more excited to actually see where the rest of the franchise is. And now I do want to go back. And even though I know that, you know, where it starts and the folks that are involved with that franchise in previous films, it's like, yeah, all right, I know it's going to have nothing to do with Prey, but I like that I already have an in into the mythology. So I just felt like it was success on every single front. As someone who had no vested interest in the franchise, like I could, even if it turned out that this would have not been, if you took out the native influence, and I think if you still had the same caliber of writers and producers that just wanted to make a good movie, it still would have been a good movie. But I think the fact of like getting to reclaim it and getting to, you know, insist on that level of representation, I don't know of anything else like it right now. And I hope I get to see more like it.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree with you.
I can talk for hours about that movie, so you have to stop me.
I have to agree with you. It was so refreshing to see that this Indigenous led film in the sci-fi horror franchise is finally happening. But like Blood Quantum, like this is what I want to see because it's my people. I can see myself up there. And so it just brings me so much excitement with films like that kids nowadays are going to see that and be like, I can do that. I can be that. I can direct that. I can write that, which is beautiful. And that's what brings me just so much joy about that. We are going to transition into TV shows. I don't have one, but I am going to touch base on mine just really quickly. So I did pick a third movie. It's a little controversial just because the director itself is a Caucasian man, and the two leads in it are Caucasian people, Elizabeth Olsen and Jeremy Renner. The movie I'm picking is called Wind River. And the reason I'm picking this and want to highlight it today is because this movie is about the Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming. And Jeremy Renner is like a tracker, mountain guy, everything like that. And they find Indigenous female frozen in the snow in the middle of winter, butt naked, and torn to bits by wolves and everything like that. And so they're trying to figure out what's going on, why she was there, where she came from. And it kind of goes all around the res, which the res is very, doesn't really let cops, FBI, and nobody in there to handle their affairs because they don't have to. And they are very secretive with that. But somehow these two people get on to help out because even the res police are kind of at a loss. And it does show a little bit of the addiction problems that do happen on the res, like the problems with these Indigenous women who keep disappearing day after day, wives, mothers, daughters that just disappear and they have no explanation for it. And then towards the end of the movie, it finds out that there are some Caucasian men who raped this girl and killed her boyfriend, and she ran. She ran for like 5 miles in the freezing snow in Wyoming in the middle of winter, and finally almost made it home and died. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is just because it does highlight I felt it did highlight a very good portion of this is happening on a daily basis across the United States, in Canada, everywhere, that this is happening to our people all the time. And we need to bring more of a light to it, because it's not going to show up on the news that these people disappeared. So this was a good representation of that. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up. It's a little controversial just because Caucasian director and Caucasian leads, but it's still a good representation, and we do need to talk about it.
Yeah, I think I've seen Wind River, and it's one of those movies that I'm like, it's well made, it's well acted, the folks that are in it. Because it's not just, Jeremy Renner and Elizabeth Olsen, it's a bunch of also really fantastic Indigenous actors like Graham Greene, like Tantu Cardinal. And what you're talking about is the missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples crisis. It's the epidemic. Essentially, this movie, there has been a huge progress within the movement. And if you go up and look up the hashtag MMIW, MMIWG, MMIWG2S, which is to talk about how there is an epidemic of missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit peoples. As a result, especially there's stretches of reservations and highways where people just go missing. It's like a horrible, it's and part of the reason I just do want to correct one of the things that you were discussing about the movie. One of the problems that's depicted in the movie is how the jurisdiction of crimes committed on Indian reservations is so convoluted at times. So for example, there are some places where if the perpetrator of a crime is white and the victim is Indian, there then becomes a whole complicated series of who gets to actually, be the law enforcement agency that actually gets to make that arrest or investigate. So Elizabeth Olsen playing an FBI agent, because the involvement of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is a federal agency, and the FBI, of course, being the law enforcement agency for federal lands. And of course, there's the debate about what constitutes a federal land versus a reservation land, and whether or not that land is within trust or ownership of this respective tribe or tribes. Then it becomes an issue of well, if we don't know who the perpetrator is, we can't necessarily investigate this the way that we would be able if this wasn't committed on Indian land, if the victim was not Native themselves, if just a whole bunch of litany of just bureaucratic bullshit that does lead to just horrible crimes going uninvestigated, unanswered, and definitely without seeing any justice. So I do appreciate Wind River being a mainstream example of trying to raise awareness for such a serious issue. I'm not able to go back and watch it again because the scenes in which they do depict violence against Indigenous women is just something where I'm I can't revisit that again. I just can't. It's just really difficult. Myself, my picks that I picked here tonight are mostly about, Indigenous joy, just because I think that is a pratfall within the mainstream entertainment industry, is that, and this is for all BIPOC communities and all marginalized communities, they love our communities the minute it's about something traumatic or difficult. But the minute that it's about something silly or joyful or anything that isn't just, trauma porn, that's when they're just kind of I don't know what that is. And I don't, who's going to watch that? But the minute it's about us overcoming an issue or overcoming a significant historical event, I mean, you see that across the board, with all marginalized communities, where it's just all right, we can move beyond just those same old stories.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate you picking something that definitely calls into attention such a serious issue. And I think anybody who wants to go ahead and look up more information, there are plenty of resources out there. The movement is something that is making a lot of progress. Secretary Deb Haaland, who is now Secretary of the Interior, she's the first Native American person and woman to hold that position. She has, they have established a task force, a dedicated task force to actually investigate, these crimes and this epidemic, and to actually see what we can do in order to mitigate, that crisis. Because I think like the most heartbreaking part of that entire movie is like they go through the entire movie, and of course there's like the caption at the end where it's like, because of our inability to investigate these crimes and because so many of them go unreported, we don't have numbers. We don't know how many people have been affected. We don't have an official count, which is crazy because it's just every other, we have crime stats on anything else, everything else, but it's just, yeah. So I don't want to like bring down the mood and like make it so serious.
No, I already did that. I do want to say though, Nom Talk Network, we're deemed to hydrate everybody. Drink
time to hydrate.
Oh hell.
No, but I do want to like make sure that people are taking this opportunity to, yes, go ahead and consume and support our art, our joy, our ability to transform our emotions into something positive. But at the same time, it's like there are real effects of like, the colonial settler, white supremacist framework and system that we find ourselves living in within the United States. It's like moving folks, from their historic homelands into so-called Indian territories, and these man camps that seem to pop up whenever there's a pipeline going up or something like that. Like these all have real world effects. It's not just about a pipeline or people no longer being able to live on the homelands that their ancestors lived on. It's like, these are the effects of like what that all means. It's like, this is what happens. So I do appreciate you bringing in a moment of seriousness with your pick. So yeah, thank you.
Oh yeah, no, I
also, yes, that movie is controversial because of all the reasons, because like, yes, for all the reasons you already talked about. Okay,
well, I had to because I don't have a lot of TV shows that I watch. I mean, I do, but I didn't want to bring in Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, so we're just going to leave it at that.
We're going to talk about that. Jeez.
But Jordyn, we are going to start with you and your TV show pick for an Indigenous TV show.
Sure. So, like my father, just I don't want to say he just comes upon shows on like Hulu and stuff. He's like, you should watch this, and I'm like, okay. And he usually like starts watching shows, before I do, because I'm like one of those people that's like, if I can't binge the show on like a Saturday and Sunday, I don't want to watch it. Like, I don't want to wait every fucking week for freaking Sandman to come out, right? Which it came out at once. And I was like, great, awesome. Or like Rings of Power, where I'm like, God damn it, why did I do this? My pick was Reservation Dogs for multiple reasons. This show is absolutely by far one of the most hilarious shows I have ever seen in my life, besides Schitt's Creek. Like, Schitt's Creek is number one. Like, it's like number one. I can't, like, nothing I don't think will ever beat that for me. Reservation Dogs is a very like close second to me. And it's just for multiple reasons. So just full disclosure, I've only seen the first season. I haven't seen the second, even though they just finished it. So I'm gonna probably like binge the second this weekend. My dad's already seen all of them, so he's like, you need to watch this. And this happens. He's a huge spoiler alert. Like, he just spoils shit. And I was like, please don't tell me. Please don't tell me what happens. But for that first season,
well, tell us a little bit about it. What is it about? What's going on in there?
Yeah. So, gosh. Okay, we're all about spoilers here. No. If you're watching this and you haven't seen Reservation Dog, too bad.
Well, this is what the network is about, spoilers.
I know, right? We're going to spoil everything. So, basically, in a nutshell, one of the main characters, there's 4 kids, and they're a part of this reservation. So I did actually look it up, and I wanted to know if it was based off of any nation or any sort of like tribe that was sort of represented in that series. And basically, they aren't identified as a specific indigenous tribe, but the show was shot on the Muskogee Nation reservation in Oklahoma. So if you don't know anything about tribal lands and how they're split and how they're sort of branched out in the entire United States, Oklahoma is home to a lot of tribes, including Cherokee, including a lot of other tribes that are split within this state. But specifically, the Muskogee Nation, basically, it was a good representation. There was somebody from the Muskogee Nation that basically said, this addressed everything that we go through on res in a way that was, I hate to say this word because it shouldn't be like this, but that was more palatable for the general public, right? Like that people could actually see what was going on, as well as like sort of look at, like, basically see the humanity of this entire of these kids and of these individuals. Everybody on this show, everybody that's written, everybody that's directing these shows is Native, and the fact that they put so much hard work into it is absolutely amazing. Basically, long story short, one of the brothers of one of the kids, you find out later, commits suicide, and this entire first season is about sort of their journey on how to deal with that loss in a way where it affects the entire community in several different ways. What I appreciated about it and what I think I sort of connected with was the fact that there was so much folklore and the fact that there was so much mythology that you hear about in Native communities, and specifically like with my grandmother, who would tell me about, like, every time we'd go visit her, it was always something different, right? Like, which is, I like give her and my dad credit for giving me my interest into the supernatural world and like things that would happen. But it was the fact that like you had an episode of like the deer woman, right? Or the deer lady that like was absolutely beautiful, right? And interacted with one of the kids that was there. It is the consistency of each character in this entire series that is beautiful and that brings sort of like to life what people don't necessarily want to accept or realize goes on reservations, on, you know, in the community, right? I mean, you address things like drugs, like, you know, like healthcare problems, right? Like, but in a way where it's like, it's funny, but also that's kind of like the truth of what goes on, right? And so at least the first season, I don't know about the second season, I can't speak about that, but the first season specifically addresses sort of like that storyline. And it was just along the lines of being funny, it was just beautiful, right? Like it was just a beautiful representation. And I don't think there was one part in that entire series that I hated. Like, you know, there's different parts of things that I could be like, oh, that was stupid, that was really dumb. And a lot of people might think it's slow paced. I thought it was perfectly paced. I thought it was perfectly done in a way where it kept me interested every single episode. And I wanted more, right? Like, you know, you kept hearing the rumors that, oh, they're not going to pick it up. Oh, they're not going to do this, right? And they came out with the second season and they're like, we don't know if it's going to continue. And I'm like, how could it not? Like, how could you not pick this up for multiple seasons? This show is beauty. The show is amazing. And so that's why I picked this TV show. It was just not only for the nostalgia, not only for just the, you know, the accurate representation, but also just for the fact that like this show is just really good, like period, like bottom line.
I have been hearing that from several people. I definitely have to pick up on that. Have you seen the TV show yet, Toni?
I have, and I so yeah, Oklahoma and so-called Indian territories were named because during the relocation, when they were just literally marching people from their homelands, especially on the East Coast and the Southeast, they would take them all the way over to what is now Oklahoma and so that's why there's just a huge collection and a lot of different Indian tribes that are there within the state. I'm not caught up on reservation dogs, but just the moments that, because I work with a Native led and my day job is for a Native led nonprofit. Almost everyone that I work with is Native. So everyone else is watching it. So even when I'm not caught up, I get things by osmosis and people dropping like gifts in the Teams chat and stuff. So like, for example, when this one of the more recent episodes had, you know, some of the cast members going to an IHS Indian Health Services conference. And like everyone dropped that gif or that moment to me where it's like, you know, this Seminole guy in like his Seminole patchwork jacket, just like, you know, what's up, ladies? And they're like, avert your eyes, ladies. Seminole men can just impregnate you by a look. And then they just like go by him. And I was like, my dad has 5 kids. My uncle has 6 kids. My brother has 4. I'm like, Yeah, I mean,
It happens.
Okay.
at least just by the men in my family, and like nobody just has like one or two. It's always like a small little brood. So yeah, actually. Or like, for example, like the most poignant thing, the one that we just like completely, native TikTok and native Twitter just like lit up on, is the moment where when Willie Jack has that moment where she's visited by the spirits of her ancestors, and it's visualized by like her actually being surrounded by especially her female ancestors, and to see traditional, me and mine were Seminole, from Seminole Tribe of Florida. We are the folks that actually resisted relocation, and that's why we're still located within Florida. There's also a Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and those are the relatives that actually were marched out to Oklahoma. So to see, traditional Seminole wear, clothing and jewelry and hairstyles, that I'm like, that lets me know that like there are people like me, or who come from my culture, that are on the show, that are, making sure that there's that representation. And it wasn't just Seminole, it was Muskogee, and it was, Creek and Cherokee, and like, but predominantly, especially because it's set on the Muskogee Nation, to see that, there is that visual representation of the cultures that are there, and that where her family, comes from. It was really moving in a way that I was like not prepared for. And I just like that visual just has like sat with me ever since. And I just was like, like, this is why it's so like amazing. This moment of like, first time ever, I know it's really sad in 2022 for us to still be having these firsts, where it's like the first like mainstream TV show that's like
terrible, but
right.
It's
but
so happy it's
living
happening.
through that moment, and to see it after you've just been starved of representation and visibility for so long, it's such a great feeling. But I really do wish for the day when I'm just bored by it, because it's like, oh, it's so commonplace. Like, the same like ambivalence that like white people have when they see other white people in TV shows and movies, are just like, just a dude. Okay.
Law and Order. Oh my God, so
Right.
boring.
So I hate to do this to you, Toni.
No.
Erric hates to do this to you, Toni.
No, what is he doing?
Because Erric does not have a pick for a TV show.
How dare you?
Erric chose Wind River as another movie choice.
What?
But unfortunately, Erric has to pass on to our next topic, which is your TV show that you decided you want.
Okay, we can talk about it then. Yes, absolutely.
So, in going into this, Toni, you have to speak in third person while you are giving us the review and everything of your pick for Indigenous TV show.
Why Toni Sanchez decided to choose. Well, Toni Sanchez decided to pick. This is my pick for when I picked Rutherford Falls, or when Toni picked Rutherford Falls.
There you go.
Yes. So part of love smoke signals, love reservation dogs. However, that was not reflective of my own Indigenous experience and how I grew up. Seeing Rutherford Falls is definitely, even though I am not from New England, I'm not like, I am firmly like a swamp kid from Southwest Florida.
You have to say Toni.
You have
every
to say
time
Toni
you
when
say
you say I.
Toni is
Toni. Your name is Toni.
Toni.
Is from, yes, Toni is not from the New England town that, is similar to Rutherford Falls. Toni is very, much from, a much different place. But the experience of being a plus size Indigenous woman who is from a tribe that is definitely financially successful and sufficient, that does own casinos, and that does end up at the cross section where Native and non-Native people meet. And the results are usually, sometimes awkward, but most times hilarious. Whether those moments mean to be hilarious or not. That Rutherford Falls is definitely much more reflective of Toni Sanchez's upbringing and life and experiences so far. So the representation that Toni Sanchez has been able to feel and experience with Rutherford Falls is unlike anything that has come before. Toni is very depressed that Peacock has decided to not renew Rutherford Falls for a third season. Last I heard, or last Tony heard, Sierra Ornelas, who is the showrunner, is shopping around Rutherford Falls to other platforms to see what's going to happen with the show.
Maybe Netflix. Netflix does pick up a lot.
We can only hope and pray, but why would you do this, Peacock? Oh my God, I'm gonna cancel my subscription. Literally, the only reason why I have that subscription is for Rutherford Falls. No, but yeah, I going back to first person account. I had never seen anything that very much just looks and feels like me, my experiences, especially my experiences. I didn't grow up outside of my community. I did not grow up with a lot of natives. So having those interactions, which I think Michael Schur, who is the creator of the show, who has also created Parks and Rec and The Good Place, I think the way that they capture those interactions in a way that feels real and authentic and never makes Native people the butt of the joke, but make sure to always place that back onto basically ignorance of Native people. I think it's beautiful. I think it's gorgeous. I think it's hilarious because the way that some non-natives react to Indigenous people, where they just, I don't quite know what to say, and I definitely don't want to offend you, but I've been steeped in anti-Indigenous sentiments since I was a child, so I don't know what to do. I'm just
Erric has to agree with you on that. A lot of people do freak out. They're just like, I don't know what to do. And Erric thinks that happens way more often. Erric is going to try and help you out with this last minute.
Thank you.
But Erric is very impressed with you that you did that for so long.
I tried. I really did.
It is not easy, but you did a very good representation of that.
Just glad it wasn't me.
Erric thinks and wants your opinion on if you guys have anything else Indigenous, and we're done. Anything else Indigenous or movies, TV shows, anything like that you would like to bring up before we wrap everything up tonight?
I mean, should I go first?
Do you guys said Lilo and Stitch.
I mean, yeah, we didn't get to talk about Lilo and Stitch, which for me, seeing a brown Indigenous little girl be weird and definitely not be treated like, oh, how adorable you are. Like, no, you're weird. You fit the girl in class and you like to take weird photos of tourists on the beach and you have this alien that's very much an alien, but you're like, I got a dog. Like that was like life-changing for me to see a little Indigenous girl be weird and be celebrated for it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Thor Ragnarok, but I could talk about Taika Waititi in general. He's doing a very good job. Well, first off, Thor Ragnarok, if you're unaware, it's very anti-imperialist. It's all about decolonization. It's all about dismantling the systems that basically just uphold, I don't know what the Asgardian version of whitewashed is, but essentially whitewashed versions of history where the victors get to craft, the history. And it's like, yeah, Odin just brought peace to the universe and united the realms. And it's like, well, how do you think he did that? Maybe with, some war, some blood, some, maybe not some great aspects of that history, but by the time Thor is of age, he just thinks like, yeah, Asgard is nice and great, but when the time comes for us to dismantle all that, like not a moment. He doesn't even sweat it. He doesn't even like take a moment to him and awe about it. He's just like, well, time to blow all this up. Like, I really appreciate it. I think if anybody is interested in my favorite short documentary film, it's a little movie that you can find all over the internet. It's called Sweetheart Dancers. It's a very, very short documentary film. It's about two powwow dancers, a gay couple, and it's for so long powwows. The Sweetheart Dance was meant to be for one man, one woman, or traditionally was held for one man, one woman, and it would be a couple's dance. Well, the two dancers in Sweetheart Dancers are a man and a man. They are a couple. They are very much sweethearts. And there was some controversy as to whether or not they could actually participate in the Sweetheart Dance division. So that short film does depict as to them being rejected from some powwows, them being accepted by others. So I always think like it's like one of my favorites. It's a very, very short film. It's like, I think like 6-7 minutes tops. So I definitely encourage everybody to check it out. But yeah, thanks for having a conversation. We could talk about so many things. Why is this show not longer?
Jordyn, did you have any picks that you want to talk about tonight?
I love the intersectionality on that. I'm for sure gonna watch that. I think one of the things for me, especially with Reservation Dogs, was there's very little shows and very little movies that make me cry. I think just the rawness of Reservation Dogs, just like I was like bawling like a freaking baby in front of my dad because we were watching it together, and it was just it's the reality of like things that set in at a time when people of color, BIPOC people, and especially Indigenous individuals, like, you just kind of see the humanity behind it. And, a lot of us are raised to think that like there isn't necessarily, they're the other and they don't experience things like you experience them. And I think that this is just, it was so raw for me. One of the other films that I did want to bring up was Moana, when it was, aired, and we talk about AAPI and Indigenous people that have settled specifically here, especially on the West Coast and in Hawaii and other places. I I loved that film when it came out. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And when we talk about sort of like Indigenous people around the globe, but specifically within the United States, we often forget that there's people who were Indigenous to their lands that were cast out and they moved here, and they settled here. And so we sort of, have to share that sort of that story and those stories as well. But specifically with the picks that I had, I think, those were the ones that I think people like. I'm not one to be like, hey, here's a palatable film that I think you would like. I'm like, no, you need to fucking watch like Blood Quantum immediately. Do this shit, immerse yourself, because I don't believe in tiptoeing or doing this shit anymore, because like Toni said, it's 2022. Like we shouldn't have to be talking about this. Like we're done, right? And so I think that we need to expose people to as much Native and Indigenous films that we can, TV shows, art, anything that we can, in order for them to just realize that there's important things to talk about, and there's important things that we all need to support, and we all need to come together on, specifically with Indigenous individuals in this country. So
That's no, I completely agree with you both. I thank you guys for being on and talk about this, getting a little deep there, laughing, enjoying it, thinking about Hey Victor, all of those good movies that we brought up today. But I believe that is all the time we have to talk about our Indigenous Peoples Day today. Thank you guys so much for coming and talking with me. Be sure to join our Discord to keep the conversation going, as well as subscribing to our platforms at Nom Talk Network. I want to shout out to my guests, Toni and Jordyn. Thank you so much for being here. Toni, go ahead and let the people out there know where they can find you.
I'm not making much content these days, but if you guys are into super political tweets or really silly Instagram photos, you guys can catch me at the Toni Sanchez, Toni with an I, Sanchez with a Z.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. And Jordyn, go ahead and tell them where they can find you.
You can find me at CityofStars13 on Instagram. I post some funny stories sometimes, and sometimes I get a little spicy and post some posts. Haven't done it in a while, but please follow these wonderful individuals, specifically Toni and Erric. Y'all are amazing. They're doing wonderful, awesome, beautiful, amazing things in the world, better than I am. So please follow.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you. Nom Watch Review and Basic Binges are in podcast form. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. But tune in for our next show. And until then, I'm your host, Erric Ramirez. You can find me on all social medias at Heartless7. And until then, have a nomorific day.